Welcome to Maker Melissa's Lab. In this video we'll be rebuilding this sign. I built this because I wanted a message board, and I'd wanted one for like about 30 years. We had one when I was in school and I wanted to have one. And with the new Project MC Square pink pixel purses that had come out recently and were going for a really low price, I went ahead and bought a few of those and disassembled them and got the little LED matrix panels off of there, and I got 6 of them in here. And so this is actually made up of like 6 different sections. So if you happen to have like 2 pixel purses or 4 or whatever, you can make it various lengths with the way I have designed it here. And they're all attached with these little cables here, and everything is kind of held in place with these little angled aluminum rods. For the first step, I'm going to be going ahead and disassembling this off of camera, and then once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and reassemble that and kind of walk through everything that you need to do. Let's get started. Okay, I've gone ahead and disassembled the sign. One of the things I wanted to do in this video is I wanted to upgrade the plastic parts. So I have changed my design so that the dovetail on here is a little bit wider. And the reason I did that is it gives it a little bit more strength on there. I've also added a little place to mount a 30mm fan on here so that I could have some cooling in case the Raspberry Pi gets a little bit hot, and added a little vent on to this piece. This sign is built around these 3/4 inch angled aluminum pieces, which give the sign its strength, but they also are allowing it to be light. And the reason I went with 3/4 inch is because I could just pick it up at my local hardware store, being that it's really difficult to get metric stuff here without ordering online. And I've gone ahead and designed all these pieces so they're very easy to print out. So the first thing we want to do is take these pieces here, and we want to kind of shave the edges of these off here, which just run this type of tool here. I'll go ahead and link the tool down in the description in case you don't already have one. And the reason we want to do that is there's a little slot in here, and it just fits a lot nicer once it's been shaved down. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean up all of these little trays here. I call them sleds, just they kind of slide down the rail, so that's what made sense to me when I was designing it. The next step is we want to go ahead and attach these to here. Now some of these you may want to go ahead and take like a hobby knife like this and just kind of clean it up, make sure it is able to slide onto one of these. The way that it slides on is the part of the bracket here is going to be away from this lip, and then you have just enough space for the LED acrylic to go along here. Now if it has a little bit of trouble sliding, then it may have had a little bit of elephant footing from the 3D printer and just shaving it off a little bit. There's 24 pieces, so it may seem like a little bit of work, but I think it's worth it. The other thing you can try is sliding it onto the little angled bracket, which sometimes can give you a little bit of trouble. And then if it slides on nice and easy, then you're good to go. And otherwise you may need to also take the knife and kind of shave it down just a hair on here. Okay, I've gone ahead and cleaned up all these pieces now, and the only ones left are these pieces, which are the wall mount brackets. I printed these with supports so that it would print a nice shape on here, and these had a little bit of support inside the screw holes as well, and that's really easy to clean up with the drill bit, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. The next step is to take these pieces and we want to attach them onto here like this with some screws. Now these ones are 440, I believe is what the sizing is, and they're about a 1/2 inch long, and I actually had designed these mounts to work with this particular size screw because I had a whole bunch of these and I wanted to use them up. However, you could probably get away with using an M3 screw, though you might need to increase the hole size slightly with a drill bit, because that's actually pretty close to the size of these screws here. So what we have is we have 4 different ones for each panel here, and there's 2 screws, so there's a total of 8 screws for each one. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera because that's going to probably take me a good while. And there we go. I've gone ahead and prepared all 6 panels. Now I want to talk a little bit about the electronics preparation. First of all, we have these panels that came off the Pink Pixel purses, and I had to do a little bit of preparation, and that involved getting these 2x8 connectors here, and they are surface mount. Go ahead and link it down in the description, but I had to go ahead and solder it to the output here so that the little notch on here faces the same direction as this little notch that shows on here. Other preparation that I did included soldering a little wire between number 4 and 18 on this Adafruit RGB matrix bonnet. And I wanted my sign to be a little bit thinner, so due to the height of the cable that would cause it to stick up, I went ahead and I removed the little plastic piece that was on here, and then I desoldered all the pins off of here, and then I resoldered a right angle connector, and that way this just fits on here, and it's easy enough to figure out which way the notch goes based on the little notch in the image. And I decided to put a little piece of electrical tape down here so it wouldn't touch on the Pi. Now for the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus here, I have some really low profile heat sinks on here, and I have removed the power over Ethernet port here. And the reason I did that is when I go to place this on here, I can push it all the way down that way and there's nothing stopping it, which is why I wanted to put that piece of tape on there, because it gets awfully close to that heatsink and just a little bit of pressure could push it, though it's unlikely. The next step that you want to do is take 2 of these little sleds and make sure this little cutout here that's off-centered is facing the same direction on both of them. And we're going to go ahead and slide them on the angled pieces of aluminum. And we want to get these in the center here. And it doesn't have to be exact, we can kind of move it around. But you'll want to make sure these are able to butt up against one another, and if for some reason they aren't, due to like some artifacts from the print job, you may want to shave that a little bit. But it has been measured so that when you put two of these panels on here, and you screw them down, that the spacing between here will happen to be about 6 millimeters from center to center, and we want to make sure that remains consistent throughout the entire thing so that you can't see little gaps in spacing of the panels, and it just lends for a nice overall result. The next thing we'll want to do is take two of these. These are also 440, and these are about 3/4 inch long. I had gotten these about the same time as I got the other screws. And what I like to do is screw them in enough so that they start poking out the other end. And then we'll want to take one of these nuts. I believe these are just a standard one. And I found that once I get the nut on here and it's flat, then I can just kind of leave it alone. And the spacing's just right so that as I continue tightening it, it'll pull the nut in and it'll keep this gap at a minimum, which will get the spacing just right between the two panels. And there we go. Okay, what we'll want to go ahead and do next is take another panel, make sure it's facing the same direction as this one, and we'll want to take one of these wall hangers here, place it on here so that it's going to be sticking out the back. And we'll go ahead and slide on the first half of this. And then we'll want to place it so that it's closer. If you notice this side, it's a little off center and it's closer to one side. That's the side you'll want to put the wall hanging on. And then you'll want to go ahead and put the rest of this on. And we'll want to do the same thing on the other side here and put the other wall hanger on here. And finally, we want to put the end ones on. And you just might need to work it a little bit, but that's why we spent so much time cleaning all these printed parts up, so that parts like this will be a little bit easier. Now let's go ahead and make sure this is a little bit more to one end by pulling down on the entire thing. And let's put this last one on here. For this next step, let's make sure the bonnet is off of the Raspberry Pi. And you can take like a mechanical pencil with some lead that's extended, or a Sharpie like this. And you want to make sure it's in its final position without the pens touching the metal, without the SD card that's going to be blocked by this connector here too badly, probably after one side. I find it easiest to leave like the USB ports and stuff with a little bit of space. So let's go ahead and draw circles. And that's where our holes are going to be. Next, you'll want to take something that's pointy like a knife and then just start putting it in the middle of that hole and twisting it back and forth. And the reason you want to do this is so when you go to actually drill, you don't have the drill bit just start drifting, because you can get your holes messed up. One of the reasons I didn't put any holes in my design is so that it's easier to just kind of print a bunch of them. Plus, if you happen to have another board that you want to use that has the holes in a different pattern, then you're welcome to do that. Now these should be 2.5 millimeters. You want to take a piece of scrap wood, just so you don't drill through your table. Just kind of put it there. That way when it does kind of punch through, it'll hit the wood rather than a table. In theory. Let's go ahead and put our Raspberry Pi here, and the holes line up perfectly. The other panel I want to prepare is one that's two over here, and that's where I put this little power distribution block. I made a video a while back about a SparkFun dumpster dive box where I did an unboxing, and this was actually one of the items that was in there. I'll go ahead and put a link to that video in the description. But to get this one in here, we're going to get it in its position, which is about halfway in between there, and then drill one hole. And then put a bolt in, and then that way we know the spacing on here is going to be exact. And now we have our holes drilled. So that's two different methods you can use to drill some holes. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the remaining bolts to attach all these together. And I like to have the bolts all facing the same direction. And you'll want to leave the ends undone because those will actually be used for the end caps here. So I'm going to go ahead and finish connecting those off camera. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and put on both the Pi and this terminal block while we can still access the underside of the panels here. Now the reason I'm using this terminal block is because it's just what I happen to have, but you could actually use something like this little snap action thing, a couple of these, in order to attach these wires, but it would require removing the little spade connectors on here. But it might be a little bit easier than the way I had to kind of create my own little wiring here. But it is another option, and I'll go ahead and link that down in the description. Adafruit sells those, and it's kind of a nice little thing. So let's go ahead and place these in here. I'm just using some M4 screws that I had on hand, and then the only M4 size nuts I happened to have on hand when I originally built this is these lock nuts. I know you probably shouldn't mix metric and imperial ones together in the same design, but when you're trying to use what you have on hand, that's kind of what ends up happening, especially with the lockdown and all. Now this probably isn't necessary, but just to be on the safe side, I like to put a little bit of electrical tape over these. I mean, they're big enough where they could potentially short together two things on the underside of this, but I'm fairly certain that's not likely to happen. But electrical tape is cheap and you won't see it, so it doesn't matter. Now to put on the Raspberry Pi, I just used these M2.5 nylon screws, and I just have the Raspberry Pi flat up against here, and what worked well for me is just kind of holding my finger on top of here and then just finger tightening the nut on here. Doesn't look like it quite got it straight, but that's not due to my drilling, that's just kind of due to my eyeballing it, but it'll work fine. Now for the ends of here, I crimped some ferrules on here, but I've loosened and tightened these screws enough times where it's kind of flattened the ferrules, which is fine. Let's go ahead and push that in. Now, when I was building mine originally, I was having some power issues, and I wanted to use this extension cord here in order to not have to worry about taking the sign off in order to unplug it and plug it back in. But I was finding when I used this cord and I started up the animations, it would actually reboot the Pi. So I built this little adapter here, and it just uses a little splitter that I got off of Amazon. I put a ferrite choke on here, but I don't think it's strictly necessary. And then I soldered this 90-degree micro USB plug, and I had to kind of shave it down just due to the spacing in between here. And I'm going to go ahead and plug that in now. And I use my pliers to pull it in. And you might notice I put these wires in first, and the reason I did that is because they're kind of going behind the plug, and it just makes everything end up a little neater. The way I designed this is so that you can kind of tuck the wiring in underneath the angled aluminum and then just kind of use the clips to hold everything. So that's going to plug in like that. Now on my other one, I had enough space for this plug to kind of fit in here, but it doesn't look like I have it anymore, so I'm going to have to kind of go in down here. And we can have that plugged in like that. Now the reason I haven't tightened this in here is because what I want to do is get the fan prepared to mount on here. Now you may have a 30mm fan that has a longer cord on here than I do, but I wanted to extend this and put a little removable one on here. So my plan is to go ahead and just clip this part off, solder these on. I don't really care which one goes which way. I'll put the clip in here, and then I'll kind of put these parallel to these connectors here and tighten that down, and then if the fan's blowing the opposite way I want it, I'll just swap the wiring and that'll be good. Okay, I finally got this fan hooked up. After fiddling around with it for a little while, I decided on M3x14 bolts, which held it in right. I decided on having the cage against here. This is a Pi fan, but the thing about it is it only hooks up one direction, meaning if you reverse the wires, it just won't turn at all. So I have it hooked up here correctly with the red wire going to the +5 volts and the ground wire going to ground, and I soldered it right onto this RGB bonnet. There's a couple connectors right next to this power plug, and I am happy with that. The only thing I need to be careful is when I do go and hook it up that nothing is like stopping the fan from turning, any like wires or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this, move it off to the side, and flip this over. And now it is time to connect all of these panels together here. So these just kind of fit in the slots in one direction, which makes this really easy. Perfect. Now these panels are connected using M1.7 inch screws, and I'll go ahead and put a link to those down in the description. And there are just 4 of them for each panel. There's a number of holes along the panel, and I believe these were originally attached to a plastic frame that was removed when they built the purses. And you'll notice that there are holes in here that align to some holes on the little sled, and that's just what you want to make sure that you're putting them in the same holes on each of the panels. And they're actually the only holes between the second and third row of the little LEDs on here. And if you're not sure which ones they are, if you look at the back of the panel, there's these silver circles here, and those are the same holes. So we're going to go ahead and just attach all the panels on here, and so I'll be right back. Okay, once you've got the panels attached, we're actually getting really close to being done at this point. Now, these wires did not come with the panels. I had to actually purchase them separately, and I ended up extending these wires by, I think I just used some speaker wire or something like that, and some heat shrink tubing, and just extended it out and used a little bit of wire ties. But once I got that, it's just a matter of taking these and routing the cables to their various locations. Just want to go ahead and tuck these in as you go along. So you'll want to start with the furthest away wiring and work towards the closest. And the reason for that is you don't have to worry about crossing over the wires as you get close to the actual plug. There. One set. For these ones, let me show you how I did this. So I plugged these in. Now I think these ones were 20 centimeter wires, but you can get them in 12. The way I did it is I took it and I folded over, and then I folded the other direction, and then I folded again until it was nice in the middle. Then I took a zip tie, wrapped it around here nice and neat. And I made sure I always did it the same direction because it kind of gives it a nice uniform look, which is what we're going for here. Now I happen to have these other black ones, which are a little bit longer, but the same principle applies. And the one on the end here, I kind of did a bunch of folding to get it to route. I'm going to go ahead and redo this because I need it to be nice and tidy. And the reason I want to do this here is we have to worry about the new fan on here, and I need it to not interfere. A little bit of adjusting, and that is good. That will not touch that fan. Okay, at this point the assembly gets even more fun. It's just a matter of taking these panels and with a dovetail joint, just kind of sliding them on. And they're really flexible enough, so if you want to just kind of take a panel and put it in the middle and just sort of slide it in and then slide it back, that's an option as well. And the dovetail joint just works really nicely with holding it in place. And always make sure you're putting the lip of these towards the panels here. At this point we could insert this black LED acrylic. It's a special one. You want to make sure the matte finish is on the outside of it and not the shiny side here. And you could just easily just insert it in here into that lip, and then take one of these and just kind of hold it in place there. Sometimes these just don't quite print right and they might lift off on a corner, and that's why I'll actually print off extras of these, especially if I'm making a video, because I'm inevitably going to run into something like that. Now you can see it's almost completely assembled here. Let's go ahead and put the, if you'll notice there's one side of the cutout, we want that one towards the Raspberry Pi. And so we want the one on the opposite side over here. Just a matter of getting everything all lined up. Now in the end here, I'm using some M3 screws. I believe these are M3 by 16, but the actual length isn't too important. I was using some M3 by 20 ones, but it would take forever to turn because they were so long. And then when you go to put on the other side, make sure your wires are out of the way. Oh no. Okay, I've gone ahead and printed out another one here, and here's the old one. Now the problem was I didn't have enough space between the fan and the lip of this, so I couldn't slide in the black LED acrylic. We'll just put that in here, put that on, and now I have that nice and centered. The width of the black LED plastic for this sign is 4 1/8 inches. It's 1/8 inch thick. I think you can get it in millimeters or 1/8 inch. I got it from a company called Tap Plastics, and the length of it actually kind of depends on how many panels you have. Okay, let's go ahead and hook this up here. And then one way you can actually make this a little bit neater is by placing the power cable underneath of here. Let's go ahead and hook up the fan. I can actually do this with a couple different wire ties. Use the first one to kind of hold it together, but it still has a little bit of looseness here. And there we go. Let's go ahead and kind of put this wire under here. And finally this piece can go on here. Now for the power supply, you'll want to get something that's 5 volts and as high of amperage as you can get. I have a 10 amp power supply hooked up to here, but you might be able to get away with a 4 amp one if you had less panels. I'm gonna go ahead and run a little demo program just to make sure everything's all working. And there, oh, it's like I have it upside down. And there we go. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. In my next video, I'll be going over the entire software setup from a fresh Raspberry Pi to it automatically booting into the animations. I'll see you in my next video.